I mean, there's so much to, I guess, digest after watching that film, particularly for people who have seen it for the first time. But the idea of it is something that had been with you for quite a long time, I think, before you made it.
Well, yes, I'm old enough. I was born in 1943, so I'm old enough to remember what it was like before the 1967 Abortion Act, when people had unwanted pregnancies, and people of various kinds, including women like Vera, were around, and was the only way people could deal with it. Certainly people who didn't have resources. And as you see in the film, there was different ways of dealing with it if you did have resources. So yes, I had the notion of one day making a film about this for about 40 years, actually.
I guess it's very easy for people to kind of vilify kind of characters like this, the kind of the classic sort of, the backstreet abortionist, and we've seen them in sort of certain films from the sort of 50s and 60s. But actually what you were doing was actually personalising and putting forward actually what, by the sound of it, is actually a much more truthful depiction.
Well, I think, obviously, when it came to actually doing it, our research, was very comprehensive and thorough. And actually, there were people of all... I mean, Lily, who takes the money and arrange and convenes the abortions. There were women who were quite cynical about it. But there are stories, many stories about working class housing estates, when abortionists would be arrested, and as they were taken off by the cops, people would come out and cheer and look after the families and things. They were part of the community. It was how people dealt with the problem, which is a social and economic problem, of course. The kind of people, but also there were people that were irresponsible who did it. There were people who were exploitative. So, in answer to your question, there are all kinds of abortionists, but the notion of someone who did it to help, like Vera, it was by no means uncommon, certainly. And it seemed to me that if you were going to make a film about this, and obviously the film is a contribution to the debate about choice and about abortion, it seemed to me that it would be ridiculous to make a film about anyone that was motivated by in a negative way or behaved badly or anything.
And this is the fifth time that you and Phil had collaborated together, but it was the first time that Imelda had, which is almost impossible to believe, actually, when you see that performance. I wonder whether you can remember... I mean, obviously it's a huge risk for both of you, in a sense, to take on, but you must have had a lot of faith in her. And I wonder, Phil, if you can remember how Imelda was sort of making the film, because obviously it's a very different process than something that she may have been used to with other work that she'd done. But
she's a brilliant actress, and good actors are fine. And the opportunity to work with Mike and do all that work on developing a character, and of course this was doubly complicated because it was a period piece, so we were playing characters who were born just after the turn of the century. But, it's a tremendous gift. It's not something you have to grow into. It's really easy. It's a first-class ride to making a film, because you get to do all that stuff, and the character backwards. And so when you come to shoot it, when you come to after all that process, it's very easy. And she was just fine.
It is the first time we worked together, but anybody that's seen her work over the years, she is a consummate, incredibly versatile character actor. All these guys, Phil not least, are character actors. You know, they don't just play themselves. But I'd seen her over the years, and I wanted to work with her. You know, and it seemed to me when I knew that this was what we were going to do, she seemed the right person, and on the whole, I was right.
and just, I mean, there's the really big scene, if you like, which is the scene at the house where they're having the celebratory party when the police arrived. And I just think in terms of having talked during the last 6 weeks about the way that you work, knowing that the actors only know what their characters, their own character. So on this occasion, you've got the party happening, the police arriving, and of course, there's, you know, Vera being arrested and her family having no clue as to why that is. I mean, Phil, from your point of view, can you remember?
Oh, I remember it was one of the best days of my acting life. It was fantastic. There was this enormous improvisation.
Can I just interrupt you before you go on, because it's important to make a couple of technical points about this. Otherwise, I think anyone that may misunderstand what you're about to say, if I may say so. As with all these films, we spent a good 6 months developing the characters and the story and the backstory and everything. And in this particular case, we did it. We always get an old building of some kind to do it in. And in this particular case, we had that hospital, which is near Alexandra Palace, between Crouch End and Alexandra Palace, which had been closed down. It's now reopened as an NHS facility. But it was a big, old-fashioned hospital with wards and, you know, all sorts of. And at one end, there was an apartment which. Where the doctors and nurses had stayed on night shifts, on overnighters, and that had become the Drake family home for a couple of months that we'd been developing it. And so what happens classically with this work is that it's done by doing improvisations with the actors in character, in costume, in real time, staying in character for a very long time. So on this particular Sunday, it was a Sunday, all the actors, the family was there, and this is the occasion which you see in the film where they're celebrating Ethel getting engaged and the announcement of the baby. What the actors didn't know is that the actors playing the cops, we'd set up a police station at the other end of the hospital in the big old Anderson ward, and nobody knew what they didn't know. So they, of course, didn't know that there'd been other rehearsals at which Imelda had worked with these various different actresses playing women with unwanted pregnancies, and she didn't know that the last one had gone wrong, and that there were people playing a doctor and nurses, etc., etc., etc. So all of that was an improvisation which you will now talk about from your point of view. Right. But it's important that I explain that, so you don't think that, because the myth, one of the myths about the way I work with everybody is that it's all improvised on camera. 2.5 months after what you're about to describe, we were in the location, which was a flat in Stepney Green in the East End, where we then would be able to draw on the experience you're about to describe and construct from remembering the 11-hour improvisation, where they all stayed in character for 11 traumatic hours. We were able to construct the scene. And don't forget, the whole film is only 2 hours and 10 minutes. So that was a dramatisation, a distillation of what you're about to describe.
Well, we didn't know at the family. We were in first early. We didn't know any other actors had been called, and it was just a normal day. And we did our improvisation. Reg was coming to tea to celebrate the engagement to Ethel, and we had been working for I think about 6.5 months by then. And, we had this scenario, our family and problems and all that. And then there was the knock at the door. So we didn't know that the improvisations that they had been doing.
Including Imelda. Like she didn't, Imelda as well wouldn't know about
None of us knew anything except that...
except what you'd know.
Except what we'd know. And I answered the door as Stan, and there was the police. And, of course, well, you've said it really. I mean, this enormous thing. And then going down to the police station, I think for a moment you did ask me to come out of character after Imelda had gone and just said, keep it on a low light, which is something we do. And Mike said, what would he do? And I said, he'd go to the police station. So I walked around the block a couple of times and then walked into the old hall downstairs, which had been transformed into a police station.
It was a hospital ward. Yeah,
it was a hospital ward, and there were actors in uniforms, policemen, and this whole scenario, and people being arrested coming through it. And Stan, me as Stan, sat there for about 3.5 hours before he could see Imelda, see Vera, and understood what was going on. And then back to the flat to talk to Frank and the kids. And of course, at the end of that improvisation, suddenly one had an inkling as to what the film was going to be about. Because beforehand, of course, we had no inkling except that it was about this family and these people and these other people who we hadn't met, you know. But what was so fantastic about the way it was arranged was that Mike's assistants, you know, the stage manager people, had coordinated it so that we weren't bumping into each other in the corridors. I mean, it was scrupulously done. And so it all clicked together. And also, you know, it was an 11-hour improvisation, and everybody's work was just fantastic. And, you know, it was like disappearing into a fictional world. And it's very important that, you know, that you understand that when we come to reinvestigate that experience, and as Mike said, you know, it gets organised and distilled down and scripted.
Scripted through a rehearsal.
Scripted through a rehearsal. So we're not improvising on camera. We know what we're going to say, and it's shot in the way that all other films are shot. But what's really crucial is that, you know, real life is such a rich soup, you know, and what you see on the screen, what you say as a character in a scene, is the tip of this enormous iceberg. And because the scenes are based on this improvisation, which was so rich, you know, that iceberg is there for you. In a scripted thing, you have to invent all that subtextual thing, but of course it was all there. And so when I said, you know, it's a first-class ride, that's what I meant. You know, all that stuff is there for you. It's easy to act it because you know what the character nearly said and didn't, or what he did say and wished he hadn't, and all those things, all that sort of stuff that's swirling around, all the confusions and all that. And it's very easy to tap back into that when you come to shoot it all those months later, even though it's sometimes slightly different from the improvisations. Of course it is. But it's all there for you. And so it makes it very rich.
I saw something that Imelda had said about when there's knock on the door, and in her world, the only other person she thought it could be was Lily, because those are the characters like she's been introduced to.
Yes.
And her kind of feeling of shock when the police walked in and how she felt. And I guess that she's rechanneling that when you film it, because you've got that very long shot in her face, which is so powerful.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, but I hate to say it, but it's common sense. I mean, that's what it's about, you know. I mean, you know, and of course, you know, she does. It is phenomenal. We hold, as you say, we hold that shot on her face, close up, and she really. You go through it with her, but, you know, because she's got all that stuff there on the go, and she brings to it brilliant acting, you know. But they all do. I mean, I'm, you know, the film is blessed with very, very talented people, actually, on both sides of the camera, really. You know.
And we were talking, I mean, we'll come to the other side of the camera in a moment, but we were talking about All or Nothing very recently, and in that film you'd introduced the actors Helen Coker and Daniel Mays and Sally Hawkins, and they're all back here again.
Yes.
Completely different character. After you know, imagine the power and the sort of, you know, how frightening Daniel Mays was in All or Nothing. Suddenly then see him being completely the opposite. And I guess that's the thing about the way that with the actors, and we've talked about this before, but they're never going to play the same character again.
No, but that's, as I say, they are talented, consummate character actors. That's what it's about, you know.
And in terms of the actual sort of film stock you used, because it looks actually as if it was on 35mm, but it wasn't, was it?
No, it was what's called Super 16, which was then printed onto 35mm. It just thought Dick Pope, and we felt the idea it would help to give it a period look, really.
And it's a very small area you're working in as well, in terms of the Drake's flat is very small, and it's on the third floor. And rather than making it easy for yourself, you actually were up on the third floor or the top floor of this building.
I mean, there are. I think it's something like 9 or 11 characters in that scene when the cops come round, plus a whole film crew with a big camera, and it was claustrophobic, to say the least. It was cramped.
And how do you decide where the best place for the camera to be is? I mean, I know that you and Dick would do that, but
that's the job.
Cramped space.
That's the job. I mean, the truth is that this is true about shooting anything or any film. Deciding where the best place for the camera is an artistic and aesthetic and dramatic and cinematic choice. But however, if you're in the corridor of a very small flat with a whole number of people, you don't have a real range of choices as to where to put the camera. It's not exactly 360 degrees choice, really.
But you'd have no idea. I mean, watching it, you'd have no idea of that, would you? I mean, it's
well, that's the idea. I mean, this is obviously goes without saying that this is not the kind of film. This is not a film about film. This is not a film about. It's not a genre film that wants to talk about itself, really.
And it was also the first time you worked with a very established editor, Jim Clark. Not saying you haven't worked with established editors before, but he was, he's a very, he'd worked.
Yeah, he's a very famous, he got everything from Midnight Cowboy onwards. I'd known him for a long time. We taught together at the London Film School in the early 70s, and I knew him socially. And it was an honour for him to cut it. He cut. He's unfortunately no longer with us, but he cut this, and then he cut Happy Go Lucky, and it was fantastic to work with the guy. And he was sort of in a kind of slightly pseudo-cynical way, was sort of bemused by the fact, having cut all those great movies, that there was no script. He wasn't going to cut conventionally, but in fact, he took to it like a duck to water, and his contribution it's a brilliantly edited film, actually.
And I get the impression that the allure of the Oscars is not something necessarily that you kind of seek, but on this occasion, as with others, you were kind of nominated and recognised in the Oscars, and as was Imelda. And I was wondering, bearing in mind this is a fairly low-budget, independent British film, with all the kind of glitz and glamour of Hollywood. I mean, how did you sort of find that experience?
Well, you're really asking me how do I find the Oscars?
Well,
first of all, the main thing about the Oscars is it's one of the worst. I've been a few times. I've been nominated 7 times. I've never won, of course. It is one of the worst organised events on the planet. It's a shambles, basically. I went with my sons. When we was nominated for the best screenplay for Happy Go Lucky, we stood for an hour and 10 minutes trying to get in a queue just to get through security in the marquee. Fortunately, I was standing next to Werner Herzog, so we had a very good conversation. But it is a shambles. And then, of course, the other thing, which is really what you're also talking about, is you really don't think you're going to win, and on the whole you're right, basically, because it's their gig, it's their party, and it's just weird to be there, and on the whole you do take it with a massive pinch of salt. I mean, it was great being with my 2 adult sons, because they've both got a great sense of humour, and they don't take no shit from nobody. We just had a laugh, basically. And the best thing that happened the whole weekend is that they bought me a plastic Oscar in a tourist gift shop, which I've still got.
I did feel a bit strange. I was nominated for a BAFTA, and the BAFTAs or mini Oscars, of getting out of the car in Leicester Square and all these people shouting at me in my brand spanking new suit and signing autographs. For a film like that, playing a man like that, it did seem a bit sort of weird.
Yeah. I mean, but in a way, I mean,
but it's so nice to be on. Yeah.
it's indeed.
Yeah.
But you just don't think about that when you're making the film. You really don't. It's a thing that happens afterwards. And I did get Best Director for the BAFTA for this, and Imelda got Best Actress. And I know this is a terrible digression, but I can't help digressing because there was a party and we all had drinks and all the rest of it. And I had quite a lot to drink, and on the way out, somebody introduced me to Barbara Broccoli, who, as you know, is the owner and producer of the Bond movies. And it was a very nice woman. And so we were chatting, and as we walked out, we went up the staircase that went up to the exit of the hotel. The Dorchester, isn't it? And people, and I just got Best, and people saying, "Well done, Mike, well done." And I was with Barbara Broccoli, and somebody said, I said, "Yep, I'm going to direct the next Bond movie."
That is a film we would all pay against it, I can tell you.
Well, I have always said that what I'd quite like to do is to make a film about which the entire film is about James Bond going to see his elderly sick mother. But we digress.
We have time for questions if anyone would like to ask.
It grew naturally out of a feeling, wanted to combine writing and rehearsing and directing, and it was a reaction to some extent against conventions that I'd experienced right from the word go as a young actor, but it just seemed a very natural thing, and also I was very concerned with the idea of the actor doing more than just being an interpretive. The actor is a contributing artist in his or her own right. So I did. I had trained as an actor and been to art school and to the London Film School, and I started in the mid-60s to develop this kind of work in the theatre context, and did that throughout the 60s until I could make my first film, which was Bleak Moments, which has been here in the season and which has just been released by the BFI on Blu-ray, by the way. I've been doing it ever since. So it just seemed to me, it's just grown as a way of working.
You know. All Mike's films and plays have always been put together in that way.
It's an interesting question. I don't think in those terms. Life is comic and tragic. We don't balance anything, or don't look. You don't think, oh, you could put a joke in here, even though it's tragic, or this is too heavy. This is too trivial. Let's make it heavy. I mean, you don't think in those terms at all. It is real. Life. Put your hand up if you've never laughed at a funeral. I mean, see what I mean? I mean, it's not a consideration. Of course, when it comes to those scenes in this film, which are unquestionably tragic and serious, and things, that looks after itself. It is what it is. I mean, if I were in some bizarre, if I was seized by some bizarre demon and thought, when she's being in the police station and she's breaking down and she's in a state and they're interrogating her, if I thought I must put a joke in here to relieve the tension, I think I should be qualified for being put up against a wall and shot. But on the other hand, all those moments which are where you do laugh because it is funny in various ways, and sometimes, sometimes it's the kind of humour where you're not sure whether you should laugh, or, it's all of that stuff going on, So, but there's no question of balance. I mean, it just doesn't come into it, really. It balances itself, like life, because life is what it's about.